Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how to create invoices in QuickBooks from Monday.com by using a tool called make.com. So what we're going to do is in Monday you have items and sub items, and what we'll do is the item will be the main invoice and each sub item will be a line on your invoice, which looks something like this. So the invoice would have these line items where we have a product and a service, a description, a quantity, a rate, and the final amount. And then you also see what the subtotal is. So that's something that we're going to build right now. So let's dive in. As a first step, I created some basic structure in my Monday.com board. So just to walk you through it, we have an item level, and on this item level we have a status column. I created a few statuses. So we have sent, sending, ready to send, ready to create, creating, and an error status. And the gray one is the draft status. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two stages. One would be to create the invoice and one would be to send the invoice. You can also automatically create and send the invoice at the same time. But I think it's always good practice best practice to first double check the invoice that's been generated before you send it to the customer. That's why we do it in a separate step. But we're going to cover all of it in this video. Then we have, one good thing to know is that this status column has been set to restrict column editing like this, because this status column will only be changed by the automation and never by a user. So yeah, that's why we do it. Then we have two buttons. One is just a create invoice button and one is a send invoice button. We're going to still set those up. So if I click it now, it won't do anything because I didn't link it to anything, but we'll do that in a second. And then we have a contacts column, which is actually a connect boards column. And it's connected to this contacts board on the left-hand side. And the contacts board looks something like this, which is also connected to the organizations board, which is a very standard and basic structure that you'd see in a lot of CRMs or systems in general. That's why I set it up for this tutorial. So here you have the organizations board with some address details, and the contacts board just has an email. So they are linked here as well. Then we have a file column, which is called invoice. This is where you will actually be able to see the generated invoice. And we have a link column, which will link to the QuickBooks invoice. So that's it on the item level. On the sub item level, we have a sub item name, which would be the product the description in this case. The product service will be something else. So we have the description, we have the quantity, which is the quantity in this case, and the price per unit, which in this case is the rate. Feel free to name them however you want to name them, but I just did it this way. And then I have one last column, which is a formula column, which just multiplies the price per unit by the quantity, so you can actually see what the price is, which you can then also use to show the summary on a parent item like this. So you see the total value, so you can do something like this. There are tricks to show actually a dollar sign before this amount. Then you would need to set up a formula column and hide this exact thing, which we can actually do relatively quickly. So I'll show you how to do it. So let's do that real quick. So it's a bit easier for your team to read. So we have a formula column. I'll drag it here. So I'll call this total value as well. And I'll call this one total value, formula. Or I'll call it just something else, such as value. The most important thing is that I can easily see which one is which column. And if they have the same name, that's quite tough. So the next step would be to concatenate the amount by a dollar sign, which we'll do in a second. So I just looked up the formula from a different project because it's a little more complex than just concatenating, because you also need to make sure that the comma and the dot work correctly. So I'll put this exact formula in the description of this video, so you can just copy paste it. Just make sure that this part is exactly the same as the name of your column, otherwise it won't work. And obviously if you do it here, it needs to be here and here as well. And if you're, for example, from Europe, you can just easily change this $sign to a euro sign. Yeah, so that's how you would do it. And then you can hide the other value column, so you can do it like this. And this is how you can actually show your team, well, how it should be shown, like this, with just a normal, just the normal formatting of the number. Whereas with a normal formula column, you wouldn't be able to do it. So you can do the same thing here if you want. Just make sure that if you're using automations, you always use the actual value column, because this column with the formula is now not really something you can use anymore, because it shows strings and numbers and then it doesn't really work well. So let's set this to my board default real quick and continue. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that these buttons work. So if you click create invoice, it should actually set this one to ready to create. So let's do that real quick. You go into automate, board automations, add an automation, and then you say when a button is clicked, and then specifically when the create invoice button is clicked, we change the status of the status column to ready to create. Pretty simple. We do the same thing. So we duplicate it. And we do it for sending as well. So when it's sent invoice, we'll do ready to send. So let's test it. If you click here, it will now say ready to create. Awesome. The next step is to open up make.com, because we want to connect monday.com with QuickBooks, which we would do with make.com. Just make a free account on make.com. I have a link in my description as well, which contains an affiliate link. If you'd like to help me, that's awesome. If not, also fine. But when you've created your account, it looks something like this. Then you go into scenarios, and I'll have my own folder called tutorials. So I'll just open it up. And when you click create a new scenario, we're going to start here. So we're going to use a webhook. So if you type webhook, you see the custom webhook. Make sure not to use the mail hook, but only the webhook. So if you click there, you can add a webhook, give it a name, such as create invoice, and then you'll see this URL. We're going to use that in a few seconds. But first, it's good to know that when you set up a webhook in monday.com, it will always require you to send back a challenge, otherwise you'll get an error. So we're going to send that back immediately to speed up our workflow. So you can click here on the bottom side on the webhook and click here webhook response. If you don't see it, you can click on this plus icon and you have webhook here and do a webhook response. So what we're going to send back is the challenge. Well, the status code should be 200, which means, okay, it's good. And the body, and now you would need to type along with me, actually is, so it's curly brackets, and then this thing, and we do challenge, and then another one, then this one, and then now is the tough part. We need to reference information from the first step that we don't have yet. So this is how we would do it. You would do open curly brackets twice, then you do one dot challenge, and then you close it with 2. And then it looks something like this. So once again, open curly brackets, one dot challenge, and close it. It looks like this. Then when you've done that, you do this one again, and you close it off like this. So make sure it's exactly the same as I have it here, because then it will work instantly and you won't have any errors. This is one of the non-intuitive things of Make, but this is like probably the most technical it gets with regards to webhooks. So if you just type this, it should work. Then click OK, and then we do, we need to copy this URL. So we go into the first step, copy address to clipboard, and then we run the automation. And now it's just waiting for a signal from Monday. So we go back to Monday. There you go. And we go into automate. And in automations, we go to templates. And here you type webhook. You click on the purple thingy. And then there's this webhook called when a status changes to something, send a webhook. So let's do that. Well, I already have a webhook here, but we're going to use another one, which will do something like this for you. Then you paste the URL that we just copied from here, from this first step, and click connect. And as you can see, it will instantly work. If you get an error at this point, you have not set up this response correctly, so make sure it's exactly the same. Otherwise, it won't work. So the automation we're going to use is when the status changes to ready to create, we're going to send the webhook. And the reason I do this is because you cannot send a webhook on a button click, so you need to do it based on, for example, a status column change. Cool. So this means that if we would now click on create invoice, then it would actually send a signal to make. So let's test that. Let's make sure it can actually change. So if it's set to ready to create, it cannot change anymore. So we first set it to draft. And then in this make scenario, we remove this module and run it again. Wait for new data. And then we click on create invoice. So it will be set to ready to create. And as you can see here, we got the first event with the Pulse ID and the name, which is invoice 1. So that's great. We now connected make with Monday. And now we go into the next steps. So the next step would be to double click here or click on the plus icon, go to Monday and go for get an item. So what's important here is that you need to create a connection. It's now connected to my personal workspace, so I'll connect it to this example workspace. You click add and you say Monday QuickBooks tutorial, and then you have an API key. So you go back to Monday, you go into your account, then you go to developers, and here you'll find an access key. Make sure to never share this key with anyone, because if someone gets access to this key, they can access all information in your account and delete it, read it, create stuff. You don't want it. So only show this to people that you completely trust, or ideally just don't show it to anyone. Another good thing to note is that this access token is connected to your account. So this means that if your account is deactivated from your workspace, all the automations will break. So I highly recommend that you set up an administrator account or like just a general account that will always be in the workspace, and that you link all the automations to that account. You can do that by just adding a new user and then using the access token while being logged in from that user. So anyway, let's go to the next step. So the next step would be to show your access token and then copy it. Don't worry, I'll regenerate mine after the video. So yeah, you copy it and you paste it here, and then you save it, and then it should be good. There you go. Then the next step is to get the data from this invoice or from this Monday item, which is the Pulse ID. You can click or you can drag, whatever you prefer. Keep in mind, we need to show the sub item, so make sure this is yes. And here you just use the board ID, which in my case is QuickBooks tutorial. And we do OK. So as a next step, we now get the data from Monday. So let's test if that actually works by running it again. I'm going to wait for new data and then go into the board again. So keep in mind, if you click it now, nothing will happen because the status column doesn't actually change. So we set it back first, and then we click again, and then when it's changed, see, data comes in, and we're actually retrieving data from the board. As you see, name is the invoice 1, this is the creator, we have some column values, all looks pretty good to me. So the next step would be to check if we get all the data from the sub items as well. Looks good. As you can see here, we have a sub item, which is an array. I'll explain later why that is important. So we have one television, which has a quantity of 1 and a price of 2,500. And we have a formula column, which is empty because formulas don't really come through in make.com. So this is great. Now the first step is to check if we, let's see real quick which one that is. It's probably this one. So as you can see, we have a contact, which is called John Doe. And we actually want to make sure that we get the email address from John Doe, because the first step into creating an invoice from QuickBooks is checking if the customer already exists in QuickBooks. You don't want to create a new customer for each invoice that you send. So you first want to check if the customer exists. To do that, we need to get the email from this column. If you have the email on this board, it's pretty easy. You can just, look through the column values and you will find it. But in my case, the contact is on a separate board, so we need to get the data from that board as well. You can technically also add it as a mirror column and just hide all those columns. But yeah, I'll show you how to do it if you actually have the data on a separate board. So in this case, we have it here. So what we'll do is I'll just rename this real quick to get invoice data, and then we'll clone this one, and then we'll name this one get contact data. And the contact would actually not be this one. It would be here the contacts and then linked pulse IDs, and they have a linked pulse ID. And that linked pulse ID is actually just this, the same as this one. That's the item. So if we would retrieve it, we would get the email address. We can do the same thing actually for, where is it? No, yeah, that's it. So we'll do that. Make sure the board is changed to contacts in this case. We don't need to show sub items. So let's run that to test. Wait for new data. So I'll run it again, and then we should be able to get data from here as well, which will return the email of the contact. Let's see in the column values. So we have the organization and we have the email, johndoe@test.com. Great. Now we also need to get the organization details, which is also a linked pulse. So you can clone it again, and you can say get organization data. I don't really mind if you do it like I'm doing it right now, or if you prefer to, just make mirror columns for each and every column that you have on these boards. You can go both ways. In my case, a mirror column would work fine because there's not so many columns, but your board can get cluttered and slow quite quickly. So it's also good to handle it like I'm doing right now. So let's get back into the organization details. So in this case, let's see, we have mappable column values again, organizations, linked pulse IDs. There you go. Once again, we need to change the board ID, organizations. So one thing is good to know is sometimes in life, it happens that people forget to link an invoice to a contact or an organization. So what you can actually do is you can make sure that this actually returns an error to the user. So I do this all the time. This is how I would do it. You would unlink this one, and you would actually double click here to put in a router. And this router just goes, you can go into as many paths as possible or as you want, but what I'm going to use it for is to handle an error, or like we're missing data, so we need to return that information to the user. So I would connect this path to just a normal path, and here we're going to say if this field doesn't exist, meaning there's no contact linked, we'll return an error. So first what I do is I copy this, so you can just copy it and then paste it in this gear icon thingy. Well, it's not a gear, it's more like a wrench. And let's call it contact exists, or contact is linked. And then we say this field exists, meaning there is actually an item ID of the contact. So if it's linked, it will just go through, no problem. But if it's not linked, it should return an error. So that's how we handle errors without it actually being an error as of now. So what we do is we say Monday and we update a column of a specific item. In this case, it's on the board QuickBooks tutorial. And the item ID is a mapped item. So don't do something like this because then it will be fixed to that specific invoice, but map it to where we actually got a signal from, which is the pulse ID. And the value we're going to change is in this case the, where is it, status by label, and the label is error C updates. And then as the next step, we're going to create an update. So we do update, create an update. And here as well, item ID is just the pulse ID. And then we say automation error. You can type whatever you want here. You didn't link a contact to the invoice. Please make sure, yeah, wait, something like that is fine. Please link it and try again. So now what you'll see if we run it, and there's no person linked, so let's not link anyone. And I click create invoice, it will say ready to create, and then it will return an error. And that error will be seen here. So as you can see here, automation error, you didn't link a contact to the invoice. Please link it and try again. Well, this is very easy for your team to see. Like they instantly get feedback from the automation rather than going into make, figuring out what went wrong, figuring out why things didn't work. So I would highly recommend working with error labels like this. Cool. Well, I'll link the contact again so we can actually go to the next step and test if this works. Let's see. Yeah, it was already connected. So let's say we would now link it. We'll try it again. So now people can just click because the label always changes. As you can see, oh, you have another error. That's interesting. Ah, sorry. Yeah, that's good. I forgot to create a filter here. So it actually filtered it here, but now it always will go this way. So what you need to do is set up a filter, and then you can, for example, say the fallback is yes. So we say contact is not linked. If you want to make it even more specific, you can say this one does not exist. But yeah, it doesn't really matter in this case. So I'll run it once again to show you. And then as you can see, it will only go to the top path and not the bottom one. There you go. So we got the organization data as well. As you can see, we have an address line 1, address line 2, city, postal code, etc., etc., etc. Cool. So now the next step would be to check if this person already exists or this company already exists in QuickBooks. So we had another step. Oh, sorry, before we go to the next step, actually, we need to make sure that the organization is also linked, because it can happen that a contact is linked to the invoice, but there's no organization linked to the contact. Probably not really something that happens a lot, but if it happens, your automation breaks. So we just unlink it and we copy this stuff with Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. And then we also copy this one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, copy and paste. And then we link it. We click once and you can just connect it to these like this. Now we have the same thing as we had here, except we need to change the filter, because the filter should be, if this one exists, it should go through. So set up a filter and we say if this one exists. So we say organization is linked. And then the other step would be the fallback step, which would in this case be organization is not linked. And then the only thing we need to do is change the update, because the update should be you didn't link an organization to the contact. This is required to create the invoice. There you go. So that's how you would do basic error handling on the user interface side. So now we go to the next step, actually, which is the QuickBooks stuff. So you double click again, link it, and then we call QuickBooks. When you click show more, you'll see a lot of things, but what we need is create an invoice. And then later on, we'll do something like download an invoice and send an invoice. But first, let's create it. Oh, by the way, we're not going to create it first. We're going to check if the contact exists. So we scroll down, payment. Well, let's do customer, or is it? It's customer, yeah. So it's search for customer. And then we can create a connection and we say QuickBooks demo tutorial. So here you would actually connect to QuickBooks as well. Looks something like this. And then it will ask you to connect it, as you can see. You might need admin access to actually be able to do this, so make sure that you have that. Then what we're going to search by is a field, and this field would be the email address. You can actually, like, there's way better ways to do this, but for the sake of this video, I'll keep it relatively short. But as you can imagine, you have, like, email addresses change. So if you, for example, now have finance@company.com, maybe in a year they have administration@company.com or something else. So if you actually want to do a best practice way of doing this, I would recommend that when you create an organization, it would actually already create the contact in QuickBooks, and then it would save the QuickBooks ID in a column, because then you can just always reference that ID, which will never change. Company names can change, emails can change. There's so many things that can change, but the QuickBooks ID cannot change, which is very important if you actually want to set up robust integrations. So if you want to go to the next step, make sure that you do something like when, I don't know, you would actually do stuff that we're not doing now, but then you would be like create contact in QuickBooks, and then would actually return the ID and put it in a column. That would actually be best practice. But for the sake of this video, I'll keep it short, otherwise it will take a long time. So let's do email here. So we're going to check for the email, and we only want to return one result. Yes, there you go. Okay, so we have email, and then we say equals to, and then we're going to refer to the email that we got earlier. So not in the organization data, but in the contact data, as you can see here, which is email, and then we have email, and then we do OK. And now when I run this automation, you'll see that we don't have this person in the system yet. Well, at least that's what I think. Let's see. Total number of bundles is 0, meaning there is no customer found. So then you would actually want to go 2 paths. You have a router again. And the router has one way, which is for contact exists. Or we say the condition, the total number of bundles, and then we do a numeric operator, greater than or equal to 1. Also known as if it could find a contact, it would actually show it and go that way. If not, we do the same thing, but then the other way around. So contact does not exist. And then the condition would be total number of bundles is equal to 0. Make sure you do a numeric operator equal to rather than a text. Sometimes the text one doesn't really work well because it's technically a number, so it makes sense. So make sure that you use a numeric operator. I'll get some water real quick. So let's go to the next step. Contact doesn't exist. So what do we need to do? Well, we're going to create a contact. Create a customer. There you go. And then this customer will just have a name and an email for now. This is fine. So the display name would actually be, in our case, the name of the item. If you have like a first name and last name column, you would use those. And then the email of that person would be the email that we got here. And all the other information will actually not be used yet. You can actually use it. That's actually fine. So we would say the billing address is organization related data. So we would say line 1, line 2, city, postal code, and country. Shipping address, by default it's the same as the billing address, but you can change it if you want. So we would have create a customer. Let's see if it works. So we try it again. Let's go. Oh, oops. Let's see if it works. So it goes this way. There you go. It's green, and it says we just created it. Just checking what the ID is. Primary email metadata, currency. Am I blind? Sync. Oh, there you go. Customer ID is 4. So we actually need that customer ID in the future. So we could actually save that customer ID now to the contact in Monday, but I'm not going to do that now for the sake of time. So the next step would be to, well, I'll show you real quick. So if you want to create an invoice, there's this thing that you need to do. Oh, whoops. Because you need to convert all the sub items into lines of this invoice. So what we see here is it asks for a customer. So in our case, it's where is it? Customer ID. By the way, it would actually make more sense to have the customer being the company name rather than the person's name. But so yeah, I would actually change this. So the name would be the organization name rather than the customer's name, actually. That makes more sense. So we have the customer ID here, and now we would need to link a line. So if I would manually do it, you would need to, select a line item, an amount, description, quantity, etc., etc. But we're trying to do it dynamically from Monday. So as a step in between, we're going to drag it here and unlink it, because we're now going to iterate through something, which are the sub items. So iterators, it can be quite a complex thing. So I'll just walk you through how to use it, but I won't go into too much detail because otherwise this video will take another hour, which probably you don't want. And if you do want it, there's a lot of tutorials on it on YouTube. So let's go into all the things we got. So the invoice data, as you know from the start, from here, has some sub items, and actually we want to reference those. So here we have sub items, which would be the, oh sorry, not this one. It would actually be this one, the one with the array thingy. If you don't know which one is the right one, just make sure it says sub items and then array, which is usually at the bottom. So it would actually iterate through all these sub items, and then we would use something called an aggregator to aggregate all that data. So the source of this data is the iterator that we just created, and a target structure type, as you can see now, it's not set because I didn't link it. So I'll link it again. And then this target, hey, why is it not working? It's probably because I might need to refresh this one. So I'll save it for a second and refresh the page. Because the target of this aggregator would actually be the QuickBooks step. Oh, it's not showing. Wait, let me fix this real quick. Okay, yeah, I know what went wrong. So you would need to connect the create invoice step, and then you would actually set this mapping, the lines. You need to set map, turn it on, and then map it to the array. And if you click OK, and then go into the array aggregator, you'll see that the create an invoice lines now shows up. And that's what you want to do. So now you see the same thing as we just had manually, except it will just look through all the sub items and put everything in the right category. So first thing, line item, a type, I'll just keep it like this, but feel free to change it depending on what you want to do. Then amount, and this is where it gets a little tricky, so pay attention. As you can see here, we need to get all the data from the iterator, and now you only see the column IDs rather than the column names. So to understand which one is which one, I would recommend going into Monday, then clicking here and clicking on Monday Labs. And then there's this developer mode that you can activate. And when you click on the cross icon, it will refresh and turn on developer mode for you. It's pretty similar to the normal mode, except if you open a column, it will show the column ID here. So the quantity is numbers __ 1, and the price per unit is numbers 2 __ 1. So let's see. Numbers 1 is, what was it? Quantity is amount, yes. And, oh, sorry, amount is here. And then amount would actually be, I think, total amount. So this would be unit price. But I see that amount is required, so we can just, calculate it, which would be numbers. And then make sure not to do this in make, because that doesn't work. There's actually something you would need to use, which you can find here in the math functions, which is this operator. So this would actually multiply the information. So by doing this, it would multiply the quantity times the price, which would result in the amount, which makes sense. The description would in our case be the name of the sub item, but you can do something else if you like to. And yeah, all the other stuff seems to failed loading. I don't know why, but they are not required because they're not marked as bold, so you don't need to set those. So yeah, now the invoice would actually create. And then as a next step, we would want to download the invoice. So let's go to QuickBooks again. Oh, oops. QuickBooks, download an invoice. And then the invoice ID would be the invoice ID you get from the step we just created, which would be this invoice ID. And then the next step would be to put it in Monday. So we do files, add file to a file column. As you can see, it's already linked to the right file. The board, in my case, is QuickBooks tutorial. And the ID is mapped to the pulse ID, which is this item. So in this case, the column would be invoice, and that's it. And now as a last step, we would actually update the column. So we would say update column values of a specific item. Board ID, once again, QuickBooks tutorial. And the item ID, once again, the pulse ID. And the status would be a label. And it would be the label, where is it? Creating. Did we not create one for created? Creating, ready to create, ready. Oh no, I didn't create one for created yet. So it would be created. Would be a new status. Let's drag it here. And then we would, I would refresh this real quick. So we get the latest status options. There you go, created. So this works. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I would also do this here. So I would right click, copy. Oh, sorry, that's clone. Right click, copy. And at the start, I would actually put it here as well. So I just disconnected it by doing unlink. So right click and then unlink, and then right click and paste. And then what we want to do is connect it here and connect it here. And the goal of this is to tell the user that we've actually received the webhook, so they have an idea of that it's working and they don't need to wait a long time to see what's happening. So the only thing we would change here is to change this status to creating, and that's it. So let's see if it works, but it's good to know that the customer now does exist. So what you can do in the step here is just copy all this stuff. So you do shift and just hold like this, and then Control C, or if you're a Mac, Command C, and Control V or Command V, and then you have it here, and then you connect it like this and delete this module. So as you know, we actually do the same thing here. The only difference is that here in Create Invoice, we used to reference this module, which we now cannot do because it's not something we can reference here, but that should be the customer ID that you see here, because now we actually found a customer ID in this case, so we would need to link it. So customer ID and click OK. Then if we save the workflow and click run once, we wait for new data, and then we can say, okay, it's ready to create. Click, let's see what happens. There you go. So now it just said here it's creating, that's great. As you can see, it found the customer because we just created it. So now you can see here, it actually was found. Then it went through the iterator, created the invoice, downloaded the invoice, added it to the file, and as you can see here, it says created. So if I now open the invoice, if I now open the invoice, you'll see my company's details. And as you can see, the television and the cable per meter is 12 times 10. Total is $2,600, which I think is pretty correct. Yes. If you want to add VAT to it, you know, there's some settings in QuickBooks. There's also some settings in Make. I won't go into that detail now, but yeah, that's some stuff that you can do as well. But as you can see here, the invoice was created perfectly fine. So the other next step would be to actually send the invoice, which I'll go through relatively quickly. But first, maybe show that it actually works by doing another test. So I'll click here, run once again. And here for invoice 2, we'll do something else, such as, I don't know, a Monday tutorial. We do 3 hours of Monday tutorials with an hourly rate of $100. And we have a presentation deck, I don't know, something like that. Just presentation deck for $1,200 and maybe lunch. And that lunch would be for 20 people, $15 per piece. And as you can see, if I click create invoice, it will be ready to create. It will be creating once it's actually received the message in Make. And then it will go through all the steps. And then when it's done, it will actually show it as created. There you go. So let's open it and see if everything worked. As you can see, different company, all the sub items are here. So that all works perfectly fine. Yeah, it all looks pretty good. So I'm happy with the invoices. Yeah, this is awesome. So now the next step would be, oh, by the way, one thing we forgot is the link to QuickBooks. So you can actually link to QuickBooks again, or as well, by going into the last step, adding the item, or sorry, adding another column, a link to QuickBooks. And the URL would be, I would need to check what the URL field is called. Line name, it's probably something like something.invoice ID. Yeah, so here you can see it in the URL. So this is 13 and this is 14. So if I would change this to 14, would it then show the right one? Let's see. Yes. So what we can actually do is just copy this link, put it here, and then the last number would actually be the invoice ID. There you go. And then it would always show it. The text could be something like click here. It could be anything. Yeah, this looks pretty good. I would actually remove this last step here and then clone this one so it would, because it's actually the same, like it's referencing the same stuff. Oh, except for the invoice, of course. So we would need to change this. And you can see this, if you would save it, you would get this error or warning. You would need to fix it, otherwise it would actually return an error. So we do this and we do invoice ID and then we save it. And then if we would run it again, let's do that here. I think it should also show the link to the QuickBooks invoice. So let's see what happens. So it's walking through all the steps. and it's almost done. It's taking a little longer than expected, to be honest. There you go. And here you can see, click here. So if I would click here, you would actually see the invoice that we've just created. There you go. So this all works pretty well. Now the next step would be, your team would check the invoice and your team would want to send the invoice. So if they click on send invoice, this will change to ready to send, but actually should send it. So let's do that now. First give it a nice name. So let's do QuickBooks create invoice and then save it, and we'll turn it on. And I'll delete all data because I don't need it. And now anytime you click on that button, it will start sending it or start creating it actually. So we created the invoice. Now the next step is to send the invoice. Very similar stuff that we're going to do. So we create a new scenario. We call it QuickBooks send invoice. We start with a webhook again. Keep in mind, it's the webhook, not the mail hook. We give it a name. Let's call it send invoice QuickBooks. And we have the URL again. But first we need to add the response again. I'll go over this pretty quickly just because I showed it in the first steps. So it would be like this, challenge one.challenge. There you go. And then we would actually get the URL from here, run the automation. And then in this case, we add a new automation from the templates. We go into webhooks. When the status changes to something, send a webhook. We add a new account because it's a new webhook URL. And then we go for status is ready to send. Cool. So it would actually now do something. We can delete this module. Let's run it again, see if it works. So we change it and do send invoice. Yes, we get some data. So we can actually copy a lot from the other one. So I'll just open it in a separate tab. Where is it? QuickBooks create invoice. So for example, these two steps, you can just copy them. So copy modules and copy. And we connect it here. So I would actually recommend, I didn't do it here, but I would actually recommend renaming all the steps to make sure that you actually know what's doing. This is super easy. It's just best practice because right now you're in it, you know exactly what you're doing and what you've done and why you've done it, but in a few months you won't. So just right click and do rename it to whatever you want. And if necessary, add a note so you can always add more information. Anyway, just a tip. So here we have the first thing. We won't change it to creating, but to sending. We would get the invoice data, which also works. And then after that, we would have a QuickBooks step that says send an invoice. I think it's based on invoice ID. So that's something I forgot to do here. We would actually need to link the invoice ID to this column. So let's add a text column called invoice ID. And then we would also go into the other first workflow we created because we want to save the invoice ID. So we go here as well. Column ID would be invoice ID. There you go. And the invoice ID is, where is it? You can actually type here, by the way. There you go, invoice ID. And we would do the same here. We add another one and we go for, we go for invoice ID. And that is this one, invoice ID. Whoops. So now it would actually save the invoice ID in this column. I know here, for example, the invoice ID is 16 because you see it in the URL. So I'll just put it in here. So we have something for testing. But that's good to know. So the invoice ID, as you can see, it's probably not showing up here. No. So let's unlink it, test it again. Yep, we'll send this one, and then it should actually show the invoice ID as well. Does it? Let's see, invoice ID, there you go. So we would actually link it, and we would say, okay, the invoice ID, well, see, it's text __ one, which is the invoice ID, is fine. And we send it to, and that would be the email of that person. So we need to get it back. We'll do it in a second. Yeah, so we would actually copy this step. Where is it? This one. We just do another check if the contact is linked. It's super likely, but I just want to confirm, like it can happen technically that it didn't link it, or that someone unlinked it. You just want to prevent all errors, or let people fix their own errors, so it saves you a lot of time. So I just copy that stuff, which is very similar. So it only thing is it doesn't map to the right stuff, so we need to remap it for a second, but it's pretty easy. Just like we did in the earlier step. So contacts would be the linked pulse ID. And then here, that would actually also be this contacts linked pulse. Oh, oops. The ID and not the array. Like this. This is all the same. Yep. And then this one is probably not showing it. Oh yeah, there you go. So send to the email, which would be this one. And now I would actually send the invoice. And then the last step would be to clone this one to confirm to the user that we actually sent the invoice. So let's do it as the last step. Send. There you go. Save. I'll turn it on. I'll just change the email of Jane Doe to my own to make sure that we have that we can actually see what it looks like. So like this. Yeah, so let's try to send it, see what happens. So as you can see, this is a pretty easy one. So send invoice, and then it will go through these steps. Maybe there's an error, we'll see. Doesn't look like there's an error, and it's sent. So I'll go into my mailbox, and there you go, invoice from demo company. Please pay your invoice. Dear Construction LLC, all the stuff that we just put in, and it includes the invoice that we created. So this all looks pretty well, and as you can see, it's now sent. The only last step would be to move it from draft to send. We could actually create one more, so it would be generated invoices, or maybe invoices to check, whatever you want to call it. And then we would say when the status changes to created, move item to the generated invoices, or created, generated, whatever you want to call it. For the sake of this tutorial, it doesn't really matter. We would do another one, which would be when it's set to send, move it to send invoices. And now, if you would actually change it to, for example, send, it would go into the send invoices group, and you would be able to show it. You could actually take it another step and actually add a paid invoices section and do very similar steps as I just did. You can do it. I'm not going to cover it in this video because this video is already 45 minutes long, so it will be a bit long, but you can do the same thing. Basically, what you would need to do is the trigger would be a QuickBooks trigger, which would be invoice paid. Then you would need to look into Monday, into the column values, and you would check for the invoice ID. If it exists, you would update the status to invoice paid. So it's pretty simple. One last thing, very important, is error handling. So it happens every now and then that that Monday is down or QuickBooks is down, and then you would need to handle those errors. What we do is we do a right click, and we're going to do this in both scenarios, so don't worry if you're in the other one. Click on add error handler and add a break module, and then keep this on 3 and 15. Or well, actually I would probably do 3 and 5. So what this break module does is, let's say Monday is down, you would actually try to, update the column value in this case. And then Monday would say, hey, error, we are down, our servers don't handle this thing. And then you would have a problem because you cannot go to the next steps of your module or to your scenario. What the break module does is it will try, in this case, for 3 times every 5 minutes to see if we, can try it again and see if it works. If it then works, it will just continue. And if it's failed after 3 times, after 3 tries, then it will be like, okay, it's fine. We'll keep it like it is. And it's actually an error. Maybe something else was wrong. But in a lot of cases, I would say in 50 or 60% of the automation errors that I get, it's because, the tools are just down. So that's why I would recommend this. And I'd recommend intervals of 5 minutes, because in this case, it's like someone clicks on creating the invoice and they expect it to happen soon. So if you get an error, it should retry it relatively quickly. Otherwise, the person will assume it's broken anyways. So you want to try to keep it as frictionless as possible. But you can change it if you want, feel free to. Okay, we're going to copy and paste this module. And I'm going to connect this module to all steps. So this usually is done relatively quickly, but it just requires a little bit of copy and paste work, which you get quite quick at if you've done it a few times. Cool. So now you would link it to all of the steps. So I'll link it real quick like this. And then there's one more important step that I'll show you in a second. Because as you can see, for the break modules, it all shows a red dot, which means that there's something wrong. And this has to do with the settings of this scenario. So I'll just connect them real quick. As you can see, they are connected. So one thing you would need to do now to fix it is go into the scenario settings and enable or allow storing of incomplete executions, and then click OK. You're basically allowing Make to store some information to try it again in the future, which is required for this break module. So we would save it. You would actually do the same thing here. So I'll do it real quick. And then, that's done. And then actually that's everything you need to know about integrating Monday and QuickBooks. Of course, you can go as crazy as you want. You can make as many adjustments as you want. You can do a lot of custom things, but these are the basics to understand what you need to do to actually make this automation work. So I saved it. I saved both of them. The whole scenario now works from A to Z. This is how you would actually integrate Monday with QuickBooks. Let me know if you have any questions. Just let me know in the comments. You can, write a comment and I'll try to answer all of them. If you liked it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to get help with custom work or your own projects, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to, jump on a discovery call with you to discuss your project and see if I can help you in any way. But if you want to do it yourself, totally fine. Good luck, and hopefully it all works out. Bye-bye.